What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Kryptonian saying here, bringing you guys another review for Chainsaw Man chapter 115. And this time we got quite a bit to talk about in this setup chapter because once again, Fujimoto has decided to subvert all our expectations, especially if you're like me and you went from the class president was just a Chainsaw Man fanboy to thinking maybe this guy is the fake Chainsaw Man we saw kill Yuko. Well, Fujimoto basically told all of us, hey, you took the bait because there might be another Chainsaw Man out there, but the class president, for as unlikely as he isn't the second Chainsaw Man. So with the knee-jerk reaction out of the way, let's back things up a little bit and let's get into the recap portion of the review. So the chapter opens up with Mitaka sitting in the hallway giving us, as readers, a very depressing update on the situation at hand. The hallways that they're in, they extend endlessly, as we all knew, but the toilets, they don't flush. And the fish have begun rotting inside their tanks, which means the bright idea that they had in the last chapter to use the fish as an endless supply of food, it just went out the window. That's when the class president speaks up and says, hey there, we would have escaped by now if you didn't destroy your cell phone, which we then learn later on isn't actually the case. And Mitaka then shoots back by saying, but you're Chainsaw Man, so do something. And that's when we learn the truth. We've all been misled as readers into thinking that he was the second Chainsaw Man. However, the truth is that the class president, he's a fraud. Remember that ripcord on his chest that he proudly showed off? Well, it's a surgical implant, and this guy is just a major Chainsaw Man fanboy. Nothing more, nothing less. The exact same type of person that Mitaka revealed that she hated when she first met Denji on the rooftop, and she thought that Denji was just a Chainsaw Man fanboy. That leads to a scene where after he begins laughing in hysterics, he then reveals that he's just a crybaby and begins screaming for Chainsaw Man to save them. And on the other end of the aquarium, we have Yoshida with a smug look on his face telling Denji, hey, that's your cue. Go ahead and save us, hero. This leads to Denji saying, I might have been able to kill this devil before, but this time is different. It came directly at him last time, but this time the Eternity Devil is hiding, which leads me to believe that we might be seeing a small tweak here in the Eternity Devil. Either it's a huge coincidence that it's just hiding, or it's literally hiding because it somehow remembers Denji. And if that's the truth, then that means it might have some of his memories, or it might just have some of the instincts to stay away from Denji, which if we see this change to the story, I'm gonna be really excited to see where this goes. But right now, I'm leaning more so on the side this is just a coincidence because the Bat Devil that we saw reincarnated, it didn't remember who Denji was. Anyway, Yoshida then reveals that he has a cell phone as well, but there's no point in trying to use it because there's no signal in this location. We get another depressing update that all the others in their group appear to have given up, and even Yoshida has come into grips with the fact that he might actually die. And he makes a joke that maybe the Chainsaw Man might be able to eat the Death Devil for them, which that's huge because we now have confirmation there is indeed a Death Devil. While this might have just been a joke by Yoshida, there's no way that Fujimoto just casually drops the final name of the last of the four horsemen in this chapter like this. This is clearly long-term booking. Now, the only question is, do we actually see the Death Devil in part 2 of Chainsaw Man, or is the Death Devil going to be held out for a later period in time? Meanwhile, Denji, being the gentleman that he is, he checks on Mitaka, who confesses that she's utterly famished, and when Denji tells her, hey, just eat one of the fishes, Mitaka maintains her stubbornness by refusing to eat any of the fish. Mitaka then continues to show she has more layers to her character by saying that she feels guilty over inviting Denji out on a date because it's her fault that Denji's caught up in this mess that they find themselves inside of. She even goes as far as to say that she feels guilty for her goal of trying to turn him into a weapon. And what I like here is how Fujimoto uses the paneling to convey these emotions, because at first when she's speaking to Denji, her face is covered up, hiding in shame. But as she begins to open up, she lifts her head and turns it away from Denji when she confesses her deception. Then her eyes are shown looking away from him as she says she just can't bring herself to do it. Then her eyes lower as she says it isn't because she doesn't have the guts or that it violates some moral code that she has, but rather it's more that she's just lost her sense of justice. She doesn't know right from wrong, and we get that overhead panel almost as if the gods themselves are looking down at Mitaka as she confesses her truth and takes ownership of the fact that her life is basically her doing her best to avoid making any type of mistakes. It's a really brilliant use of paneling here to show us how far Mitaka has fallen while also seeing how tragically she has room for redemption. But the question is going to be, will Yoru actually allow for her to be happy and allow her to get redemption? However, our boy Denji, he isn't trying to hear any of that, and he just gets in the tank with Mitaka and says, well, if you can't eat fish, then why not eat a starfish? And that's how the chapter itself ends off. Now, to unpack what we have here in this chapter, there are a few things that stand out. So the confession by Mitaka is obviously what stood out the most here, in my opinion. She's feeling guilty, and that guilt is both a reflection of her own character growth from how we were introduced to her in the very first part of Chainsaw Man Part 2, and also a reflection of her being inside of her own head. You can say she blames herself for her mother's death in a way, but we can definitely say that she feels some kind of way about Yuko making that contract with the Justice Devil and going off on the school bullies on her behalf and ultimately getting killed. Now, she's in her mind giving Denji a death sentence by having him out on this date, and we see it all eating away at her as the time's gone by and as she's been left alone and she's trapped inside of her own thoughts, and we see that that's a dangerous place for Mitaka. Now, the other thing that stands out here is that the class president, while he is a jerk, he is a huge jerk, I still want Mitaka to make him into a weapon because I absolutely can't stand him. However, he's a very human character and is doing a good job of accomplishing what Fujimoto's goal is of making an instantly unlikable character, which mission accomplished by having him spew anger towards Mitaka for not being able to escape the situation they find themselves in, while also showcasing the humanity for his character in one of two ways. The first is the aforementioned blame of Mitaka, because it's just human nature to seek blame for others when you're in a dire situation like this, even if it isn't the most logical thing to do, because when human emotions involved, there is no logic in most cases. It's fear and it's desperation that we're seeing, and those two are extremely dangerous emotions to feel. Now, the next thing we see out of his character is that the fear breaks through when he screams out of desperation for Chainsaw Man to save them. It takes him from being unlikable to crying in a way that was so pathetic that I couldn't just bring myself to hate him any longer. He was like that dog you see looking at you with puppy dog eyes, begging after it's done something wrong. You just can't bring yourself to be mad at him in any sort of way. Now, the other thing that the breaking down of his character does is that it also hides right in our faces as fans the reaction of what we should be focusing on, which is the fact that this is not the fake Chainsaw Man. All the fanboying and all the crying and all the moaning and anger he had is meant to hide the fact he's not the real fake Chainsaw Man. It's almost as if Fujimoto just smacked us in the face and then turned around and gave us a lollipop and a band-aid and said, don't pay attention to the fact he just slapped us. Instead, pay attention to this lollipop, which I'll admit he totally got me for the first time when I sat down and read the chapter. Then when I reread the chapter in order to do the review, I said, wait a minute, that sussy Baku Fujimoto just pulled wool over my eyes. What also stands out here is that we see Asa Mitaka spiraling, and I think this does a lot for further humanizing her character. And what I love most about this is that this is a human element to her character, where she's the rawest that we've seen her since she was dying in the first chapter of Part 2. And what we also see is that we see this side of her when Yoru is no longer connected to her. Symbolically, this was a brilliant piece of writing by Fujimoto. One that I think is the early frontrunner for emerging out of this current arc as something that is going to be the key takeaway that we have to this story. This feels like a foundational piece for her character, and there are so many different ways it can take Mitaka once Yoru's back attached to her. She's a blank canvas that can be dyed any color right now, for darker or for lighter, and what we're seeing is nothing short of a tragedy for Mitaka, which is going to be huge when Yoru finds out that Mitaka told Denji her power to turn people into weapons, because Yoru flat out said that if she speaks up, she will kill her. But it's debatable whether or not Denji heard her clearly or not, and the fact is that Yoru is connected to Mitaka, and if Mitaka thinks about this in the future, Yoru's gonna know that Mitaka said too much, and there might very well be consequences here. While the chapter wasn't short, it was only 10 pages, there was a surprising amount to unpack here once you dive into the characters. This is more of a character-driven chapter right here. So my chapter question to you guys is going to be, what do you think this moment is doing for Mitaka as a character? And now that she knows the class president isn't Chainsaw Man, do you think it's going to be a moment where she looks at Denji and realizes that he's Chainsaw Man at some point in the story? While you think that over, click here to watch these other Chainsaw Man videos that you see on the screen right now.